pretty much any time we've seen a new variant, it's already spread around the world. So the fact that Omicron is in multiple countries in Europe, in the U.S., is not necessarily an ominous sign. And I think that's a key point to keep in mind. And also remember, we've not seen any evidence that Omicron produces more severe disease than any of the other variants. Another point to keep in mind. And now, in terms of whether or not this variant is going to resist the immune response to our current vaccines, it's possible, but it's unlikely to be totally resistant. It may be partially resistant, just like other variants that we've seen, like the B.1.351 from South Africa. Remember that one, the Beta variant, and the Lambda variant. So, and those never really took off, even though they had a lot of other concerning mutations in the spike protein. So we'll know about how effective vaccines are because we can do a test. What you can do is measure antibody responses to the vaccines, either in laboratory animals or from patients who have been, or volunteers who have been immunized against the vaccines, and see if those antibodies will cross-neutralize the Omicron variant. And we'll know that probably by next week at this time or within the next 2 weeks. So that's going to be a vital piece of information. So, for instance, our scientists at Texas Children's Hospital and Baylor are now looking exactly at that, or the immune response to our vaccine, seeing if it cross-neutralizes Omicron. So that's going to be a key point. And then the most important thing we really need to know right now is how transmissible is this variant. Yes, it's taken off in the province that contains Pretoria and Johannesburg, but is it sufficient to outcompete the Delta variant? And I don't really think we have strong evidence for that either. So, a week from now, if we have this discussion, we'll have a lot more information. But right now, I think it's important to focus on what we do know is the biggest threat in the United States, and that is the Delta variant. It is accelerating now, and the U.S. population is incompletely vaccinated.
Yeah, but what about these travel restrictions? I mean, is this the best way to slow the spread, or is it time to start requiring vaccinations to fly worldwide, or to conduct, mandatory testing when people fly in from another country? What do you think?
Well, I thought, we had mandatory testing from South Africa, so they were presumably negative when they boarded the plane, and all of a sudden they became positive. So either the testing was fraudulent or inadequate, or I think we have to work that out as well. What we do know is travel bans have not been very effective this entire pandemic. I mean, remember in the very beginning, Jim, back in early 2020, we talked about travel bans from China. In the meantime, this virus entered into the United States from Southern Europe to ignite that horrible epidemic in New York City that started in March and April. So travel bans, we don't really have a good sense on the global travel of this virus. I think much more productive than travel bans would be refocusing our energies on trying to vaccinate Southern Africa, because that's how these new variants emerge. They emerge out of large unvaccinated populations. Alpha came out of the unvaccinated population in the UK in 2020, Delta, the unvaccinated population in India in 2021, and now Omicron among an unvaccinated population in Africa. So if the G7 leaders are serious about stopping new variants, forget about the travel bans. Let's go vaccinate the African people.
And even without this new variant, hospitalizations in the U.S. are rising again. We're averaging more than 1,000 deaths per day. How bad could things get if Omicron is a nasty variant that does cause, more hospitalizations, more problems with being more transmissible and so on?
Well, I think, this is a key point here. We're wringing our hands about Omicron. Meanwhile, the Delta variant is decimating our country right now. The numbers are going back up. We only have 59% of the U.S. population vaccinated. A high percentage of those have not gotten boosters, and so we've got waning immunity. And then the unvaccinated are going to suffer just like they did over the summer here in Texas in the South, where we have 100,000 Americans unvaccinated who have lost their lives since the summer, defiant of vaccinations. And then those who are infected and recovered are not getting vaccinated. They have incomplete protection. So we have to really try to find a way nationally to convince people to get fully vaccinated. And not only will that help them not suffer and lose their lives from Delta the variant or get hospitalized, but it will likely, and we'll know this more in the next few days, build in strong resilience against the Omicron variant as well. That's the single most important thing right now the American people have to do. Make certain that everybody's vaccinated, including their kids and those who are infected and recovered have to get vaccinated on top of that.
All right, Dr. Peter Hotez, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. The new COVID variant has rattled global markets. The Dow had its worst day in more than a year, closing down more than 900 points. Joining me now is the anchor of Quest Means Business, Richard Quest. Richard, put Friday's frenzy on Wall Street into context for us. I mean, is this something we really should be concerned about? I mean, I can't imagine what the market's going to do on Monday after we've been stewing on this all weekend.
We shouldn't be concerned, but we should be wary, if that's not a contradiction in terms, Jim. What I mean is, of course, it's understandable. The market was not being irrational when it fell on Friday. The level of uncertainty, you heard Peter talking about it just then, the unknowns that we just simply don't know. And until there's an element of certainty, as long as travel bans increase and it looks as if there'll be more restrictions, that will slow down economic activity. Therefore, companies and the corporations will not know how to react. Will we? I'll give you a blunt example here. Let's just say Omicron does expand and does become a variant of greater concern. What happens to all the return to work policies, including at our own Warner Media and at CNN, January the 10th? What happens to all of that if this gets worse? And that level of uncertainty is what is going to spook markets and spook investors, and it's perfectly logical.
Yeah. Man, I don't want to think about that, Richard, at all. And we have the U.S. and other countries instituting travel bans.
Right.
You know, I asked Peter Hotez about this. You know, a lot of the experts out there, they just don't think these travel bans work very well, and they're just going to hurt the airline industry.
Well, first of all, the flight that came from Africa to Amsterdam, where 10% were shown to be positive, that's an anomaly. I don't understand that one yet, because I've done an enormous amount of international travel over the last year, and I can tell you, you know, I'm on to my 60th PCR test for travel purposes. So there's testing galore going on. I don't really follow what happened. I can understand the political necessity to say we're doing something, and the easiest and most obvious answer is pull up the barricades. But a more sophisticated response is what's required if we're going to carry on with our normal lives. For instance, the British government announcing that it was raising the test you take on day 2 from a lateral flow antigen. It now has to be PCR. I can see, for example, the United States considering whether or not there needs to be a return to the PCR or antigen test once you get to the United States. Currently, it's just on departure. So there's lots of ways you can skin this, if you like. You don't need a sledgehammer to crack the nut.
Yeah, and we've already reported on issues with the supply chain and how everything from gas to groceries is more expensive these days. It's happening all over the world. Americans are upset about it, but by the way, it's happening, you know, in other places. If the world shuts down again, all of that gets exacerbated.
Oh, absolutely. Which is why I don't think the world is going to shut down again. I do not foresee, certainly in Europe and the United States, I do not foresee widespread lockdowns of the sort we saw in 2020. It's highly unlikely. The public wouldn't stand for it. It would be broken before it had got started. But I do see targeted lockdowns. I see those for the unvaccinated. I see many more restrictions being introduced for the unvaccinated, where they can go, how they can go. And the reality is now, Peter Hotez made this point extremely clearly. Let's take the United States. Just about 50% is fully vaccinated. Now, that is the danger for Delta and Omicron. Those of us who are fully vaccinated with boosters have a much lower risk for serious injury or harm as a result. And the truth of the matter is, focus on that. Focus on the low. People, you know, Jim, friends and contacts and people are saying to me, I'm worried about Omicron. I'm worried about Omicron. Well, yes, you may well be, but you should be more worried about the low level of vaccination in many of the countries that are responsible and the failure of the G7 and the G20 to actually vaccinate the developed world so that we were all in this boat together, rather than at the moment the inequality that exists.